Okay, I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Right, so last week we started exploring the Gospel according to Dynasty. It's kind of like the Gospel according to St. John, only with more guns and slightly less three-syllable words. For those of you who don't know, Duck Dynasty is a reality television show on A&E that follows the antics of a group of Louisiana rednecks who run a duck call business. And what we're doing in this series is we're having a wee look at some of the Christian values that are evident in the show, and then we're relating those values back into the Bible and from the Bible forward into our difficult, complicated, messed up lives. And this morning we're going to talk specifically about women and why they're always wrong.
Wrong.
This is Phil Robertson. He's the guy who started the duck call business that the show is based on. And in the show he comes across as the sort of grandfather that everyone wishes they had. You know, highly opinionated, slightly inappropriate, deliciously politically incorrect, and, you know, just a general good guy. And he said, I've been on this earth for 60 years, and I've reached a conclusion, and it's a fact: women are strange creatures. Would anyone be brave enough to indicate by the raising of their hand that they agree with that statement? Okay. Yeah. And anyone disagree with that statement? Roughly split along the lines I would expect. Let's have a wee look at a scene from the show.
Today I took Miss Kay to find some fine cypress logs for my duck blinds.
Where are these logs we're looking for?
Huh?
Where are the logs we're looking
They're on up the creek.
for? This is like being in the pioneer days.
Yeah. I'm guessing she'll do most of the talking.
Doesn't it remind you of back when we were dating back at Black Bow? My daddy had the fishing camp we did.
Yeah.
I was the paddle girl.
Yeah.
And you run me up under those hanging limbs and all those spiders ran over me. Remember that?
Yeah.
Then you remember what happened next?
Yeah. And I act like I'm listening to her, you know, the whole time.
Remember when we went down there and I bought you $100 worth of bait?
Yeah. You remember the time, you know, we were, you know, I was like, yeah, I remember that.
Remember when we were dating and Si had to go with us all the time?
Yeah.
Remember when Si tore up that motor I paid for?
Yeah.
Remember that?
After 50 years, I have learned the art to be oblivious to chatter. I can turn it off and not even hear a word.
We should have brought a picnic.
Hunting logs, Miss Kay. Miss Kay.
Now, yeah. What I find interesting about that is that those two people have been married for over 50 years. Their marriage has endured all sorts of ups and downs. They've known some very, very dark times, poor times, times when they didn't think they would make it as a couple. And yet, as strong as their marriage is today, there's still this experience of, I'm over here talking, and you're over there not listening. And you're over there thinking that this is about spending quality time together, and I'm over here thinking this is about finding cypress logs, whatever they are. I think that we all need to accept, be we men or women, that the other lot are different. And that being the case, being in a relationship with one of them is therefore sometimes difficult. Is that not just a statement of fact? Yes. Because they are different, being with them is sometimes difficult. Have a look at this. It comes from a great part of the Bible, written, I guess, late Bronze Age, maybe early Iron Age, called the Book of Proverbs. And the writer says, there are 3 things that are too amazing for me, 4 that I don't understand. Now, when he says 3 things that amaze me, 4 I don't understand, he's emphasizing the 4th thing. This is an ancient Hebrew technique. I have something to tell you, but before I tell you what that something is, I want to tell you about 3 very similar things, okay? So 3 things that are amazing. A fourth thing, the main thing, I don't understand. Thing number one, the way of an eagle in the sky. It's too amazing for me to understand as I look at the way it soars and swoops and hovers. It is to me at the same time both amazing and bewildering. Number two, the way of a snake on a rock. It's too amazing for me to understand as I observe the way it moves, seemingly without effort, its motion unpredictable, its thoughts impenetrable. It is to me at the same time both amazing and bewildering. Thing number three, the way of a ship on the high seas. Too amazing for me to understand. As I see the way it pitches and rolls and leans, it is at the same time both amazing and bewildering. So you see what he's saying here. As I observe these different phenomena in the natural world, I have to concede, wonderful though they are, that there is something about them that is imperceptible to my cognitive abilities. They contain an element of mystery. I do not fully understand everything about them. Then he says, one more thing I don't fully understand everything about. The way of a man with a woman. Now, the word way in these sentences can mean slightly different things depending on the context where it's used. The English word way is a translation of the Hebrew word deber, and deber can mean a path. This path that goes from here to there is a deber. Or a journey can be a deber. I've got to go to Shoppers Drug Mart and get some Factor 30 because I'm off to Mexico on a deber. Or the distance between two places can be deber. So from Nobleton to Bolton is a deber of 10 miles, something like that. So the big semantic umbrella of this word has to do with the concept of movement. Movement from one place to another place. So if I read this ancient wisdom correctly, and of course I do, then the writer is saying here that the journey of a man and a woman through life together is amazing. And not only is it amazing, but in my amazement I am frequently befuddled by it. It confuses me. He's saying that whenever I think about a man and a woman doing that thing they do together, I think about something that is at the same time both wonderful and bewildering, and I think this is helpful. God's wisdom is speaking into our relationships and is saying to us that the thing that a man and a woman have together has the ability, on the one hand, to amaze you with its sizzle, to comfort you with its security, to transport you into another world temporarily with its fun and its intimacy and its pleasure and its togetherness. And yet it also has the ability to take you aback, to confuse you, to ruin you, to frustrate you. And at this point, we can, I think, all nod our heads and say on this issue, the Bible is certainly right. I understand what it's saying. Because in my life, relationships with the other lot have brought moments of incredible pleasure and hope and security and intimacy and closeness. But they have also brought their fair share of tension and disappointment and pain and And so with the Bronze Age sage, we can say, I understand. I get it. It's difficult because we're different. And that being the case, sometimes, particularly in churches, we get rather simple answers to what are in fact rather complicated problems. For example, Phil Robertson, the guy from Dynasty, says this. He says, I counsel young men all the time, and I tell them to find a woman and eat 6 of her home-cooked meals before signing on the dotted line. If you're going to spend the rest of your life with her, you at least have to know what the grub is going to taste like. And there's a part of me that listens to that and says, that makes total sense. I mean, why are only the women laughing? I thought, it's totally logical. That's a great idea. We should all do that. And then there's another part of me says, if you tried that on any woman in the GTA, you're going to get killed.
Yep.
You're going to get a home-cooked meal, all right, with cyanide in it. Now, darling, why does this pasta smell like almonds? And more worryingly, why does the pastor know that cyanide smells like almonds?
Yes, yes.
Moving on. Do you understand, we don't live in a simple world anymore, and sometimes the simple answers are good and appealing, but the fact is, it's more complicated. And I think that because relationships are so good, and yet so mysterious, we have to think that perhaps they tell us something about God himself, who is good, and also mysterious. Here's a thought. Maybe the love, and the frustration, and the disappointment, and the hope, and the fear of relationships reveals something not only about the way we are, but also something about the way our Maker is. In the early pages of the Bible, we find a man and a woman together, and the view of the Bible seems to be that their togetherness is a good thing, and that loneliness, by comparison, is not. And yet often in relationships the difficulties outweigh the benefits, and loneliness is the terrible result. And so what I want to do for the rest of this talk is look generally at those difficulties, and I want to do so by giving you four lessons. And I'm applying these lessons to our relationships, or lack thereof. But I think they can apply just as well to our businesses, to our careers, to our health, to virtually any area of our lives. So this is real value for money stuff you're getting today. And let me preface those lessons by saying this. I think that each and every one of us are smart enough, even the dumbest of us, we are smart enough to look at our own lives and realize for ourselves that in some areas things are not as good as they could be. For example, next Sunday, I'm going to talk about the whole personal finance area of our lives. And if you have a problem in that area of your life, you're not going to come to church next Sunday and discover it then. You already know, right? Similarly with the relationship stuff, how frustrating is it to go to a marriage counsellor, or one of these people, you know, the kind of person who just nods like this, that'll be $150. Got nothing useful to say, but it'll be $150, right? How frustrating would it be to go through months and months and months of that, only to be told at the end of it, well, I've assessed your situation, and you've definitely got a problem. I know! That's why we came. None of us are that dumb. We're smart. If there's a problem in our marriage, we usually know there's a problem. If our relationship with our children isn't what it ought to be, we're usually aware of it. If our career or our business isn't going as well as it might be, we don't need a consultant to give us that information. We instinctively know it. We're all smart enough to recognize when we have a problem, and we're usually smart enough to figure out what that problem is. So here's lesson number 1. Knowing that you have a problem doesn't fix your problem. For the problem to be fixed, you actually have to do something about it. And this is the bit that we find difficult, because in the problem areas of our lives, we have a tendency towards selective laziness. So we might be very successful and very hardworking in the professional area of our lives over here. But we might be rather lazy at dealing with a relationship problem in our lives over here. We might be very good at the bringing up children part of our lives over here, but rather lazy at the dealing with our debt problem area of our lives over here. Problems are difficult by definition. And it takes more effort to deal with the problem areas of our lives than it does to deal with the successful areas of our lives. That's why when it comes to dealing with the problems in life, we all tend to be rather lazy and blind. And we have this kind of sappy, unrealistic belief that someday things will just get better, but someday never comes because we never make it come. So, sorry if this is awkward, but you know it to be true. Knowing that you have a problem doesn't fix it. The Bible says a lot of fascinating things about the lack of motivation with which people approach their problems. Let me show you a few of these. This is from the book of Proverbs, and it says, the sluggard, this is a lazy person, says, ooh, there's a lion outside, or, oh, I might get murdered in the streets. So whoever wrote this sentence was thinking about a lazy person who never does what he should do because he always seems to have a legitimate excuse. So the person in this sentence knows that he should get up off his own backside and go outside and do something. But he doesn't do it because his mind is paralyzed by what if. What if I get eaten by a lion? What if I get murdered? Now, when this text was written, this was pretty common. People did get eaten by lions. People did get murdered quite often in the streets. So the fears that this man has are not entirely illegitimate. But a legitimate fear can still become an excuse that prevents you from doing something about your problem. Let's say that you've got a problem right now, and that is you don't have any meaningful relationships. And there's a reason for that. Very valid reason. You've been hurt in the past. And consequently, you're very apprehensive about being open with people for fear that you might get hurt again. Is that a legitimate fear? Absolutely. But it's not fixing your problem, is it? Let's say that you're alone at the moment and you'd desperately like not to be. And you're looking for someone, and in the course of looking, you've been on dozens and dozens of really bad dates, and lately it feels like you're a magnet for losers, weirdos, and flakes. It seems like you have this ability to attract people who don't seem to understand that a skill you're looking for in a prospective life partner is not the ability to manage a virtual farm on the internet. You're looking for something a bit more than that. But you've been on so many of these, and it's so disappointing and so frustrating that you're at a place in life where you're just feeling like giving up and not doing this anymore. Is that a legitimate feeling? Of course. But you're still lonely. And still frustrated by it. Let's say that after church next Sunday you become aware of this personal finance issue that you really need to sort out in your life, and you summon up enough motivation to go to a debt counsellor or something like that, and you go through the motions, and then you get to the point where you have to make difficult decisions about your spending and your budgeting and all that stuff, and it becomes difficult. You're afraid of the changes it will bring in your life, difficult changes. Is that a legitimate fear? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's hard, awfully so. But it's not fixing your problem. Lesson number 2. If you have a problem, an excuse is never the solution. Next text. The sluggard, so we're still talking about the lazy man. Then he uses rather cartoon imagery. He says he buries his hand in the dish. So is that one of these meals you have in the Orient where you eat with your right hand and, oh, that looks nice. But he can't quite summon the motivation or energy to bring his hand out of the dish back up to his mouth. It's bizarre imagery, one I certainly can't relate to. Now, I think the person who wrote this sentence is overstating his point, so he can make a point. And the point is that there are some people who are definitely aware of a problem or a desire or a need that they have in life, and yet when it comes to actually doing something about it, they just can't be bothered. They're overcome with inertia. And if that's where you're at the moment, I want to say something that will somewhat absolve you of responsibility. It isn't your fault. It's God's fault. One of the physical and fundamental laws of the universe, the first and second law of thermodynamics, is that there's no such thing as perpetual motion. It's written into the DNA of the universe that things cannot move and do not move without effort. And if effort is ever removed from a moving thing, the moving thing will stop moving. If you take a ball and you spin the ball, it will go round and round and round, but eventually it will stop spinning, and to get it spinning again will require fresh energy and effort. We learn this in high school physics. Moving objects do not naturally move. Something has to operate upon them to make them move. Otherwise, inertia will take over. This is a law of the universe. But what we don't learn in high school physics is that it is also a law of our lives. David Letterman said famously that everyone has a purpose in life. Maybe yours is watching television. There's truth in that. There's not a single person in this room who would say, my purpose in life is to watch television. Not one. The values that we espouse are nobler than that. We say that our priorities are things like spending time with the family. That's what I want to do. Or free time is for making myself fit. Or free time is for improving myself. Or we have this noble set of priorities that we say we're all about. But when you actually examine the way we choose to live, we might spend very little amount of time on those things we say are our priorities, but instead, in the words of David Letterman, spend 4 hours an evening watching mind-numbing, spirit-crushing game shows, and so on and so forth. And so the point that David Letterman makes is that we all have the aspiration to do these noble things and to improve our lives in these good ways. But doing all that is an awful lot more work than sitting on the telly and watching the sofa, sitting on the... whichever way you do it in your home. Personally, I like to sit on the telly and watch the sofa, just for fun. Just because I can. And so in this moment, do I sit down, do I watch the telly, or do I get off my butt and go to the gym, or take the kids for a walk, or do something? Inertia takes over. And then the fundamental law of the universe kicks in, and we do nothing. Lesson number 3, remember where you heard it first. Doing nothing is easier than doing something. If you want to make something of your life, if you want to fix a problem in your life, or fulfill a lack in your life, that's great. But doing what you want to do is an awful lot harder than doing nothing. Next text. This is, I think, my favorite verse in the Bible. The writer says, I went past the field of the sluggard, past the vineyard of the man who lacks judgment. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds. The stone wall was in ruins. I find the sentiments there absolutely fascinating. The writer says that when he walks past the field of a lazy person, now you would expect that when you walk past a field that belongs to a lazy person, a person who has consistently made a decision to do nothing because it was a lot easier to do nothing than it was to do something, you would expect that in that field you'd find nothing at all, right? That would just make sense. Your starting point is here, and you feel that you want to go from here to over here because here is better, but that's just an awful lot of work, so I'll just stay here. And so everything will stay just the same. I'll begin with this blank slate, I'll do absolutely nothing, so I'll end up with this blank slate. That's the way we think it works, but no. In this sentence we see that the field of the lazy man is in fact full of all sorts of things. It's just that none of them are any good. Thorns thorns, weeds, and ruin. Lesson number 4. Doing nothing about your life will produce results. It will take you somewhere. Just know we're good. So let's say you've gotten yourself into a money mess and you're aware that that's a problem, but there's just too much difficulty involved in fixing it, so you do nothing about it. Will your problem get better or worse or stay the same? Get worse. I'm going to go over a few paragraphs because my turkey's in the oven. What time is it, someone? 20 after. So I'll finish soon, then we can have questions if there's any. Okay, so 4 life lessons. I hope you find them helpful. Life lesson number 1, knowing you've got a problem doesn't fix the problem. Number 2, if you've got a problem, an excuse is never the solution for you. It's not the answer. Number 3, doing nothing is a lot easier than doing something. Number 4, doing nothing will produce results. Bad ones. Now let me wrap this up as delicately as I can, then we'll go to questions. One of the things that I have a hard time with, and that I'm sure you have a hard time with too when you listen to some of this stuff, and when you watch shows like Dynasty, is that you know they're essentially all about the family and family values. And there's the imagery of a family around a happy table having a meal together and all that stuff, and saying their prayers together, and and everything seems to work. Everything seems to be nice. When some of us watch this imagery and talk about this subject, all it does is reinforce the sense of guilt and despair and frustration we have with our own situation. That's all it does. A situation that is less than perfect. A situation where our Thanksgiving family table is, well, less full. 2 things you need to hear from me. Number 1, I know how you feel. I'm there with you. Number 2, I want you to know that Jesus reserved some of his kindest words to those whose situation was less than perfect. For those whose adult life did not match the assumptions, much less dreams, of youth. Unlike the church of today, Jesus reserved his harshest words and criticisms for the hidden sins, sins like hypocrisy and greed. He never hesitated to speak against the pious and the proud who thought they were better than everybody else. That's who Jesus reserved his harshest words for, not those who endured the pain of a messed up family life. And I think that in this church we're more about following Jesus than we are about listening to the church. So if your wife is weird, I get it. If your husband is an idiot, I understand. But for goodness sake, try and make it work. Try and fix it. Because the alternatives are awful. They just are. Ask anyone who's been through the alternatives. Try and make it work. And if you don't have someone, and if you're alone, and afraid, and all that, Jesus is with you. We learn in the ancient scripture that he is particularly close with those who mourn and with those who are brokenhearted. If your Thanksgiving table is a bit less perfect than it used to be, or you'd like it to be, Jesus is close in your home today. He just is. Any questions? Yes.
You made a statement that it was God's fault. I know you didn't mean that, but what exactly did you mean?
Why I meant exactly what I said. Oh, sure, yeah. As it happens, I can. Okay, so the point I was making, the brilliant point I was making, was that there's just certain laws in the universe and in life. For example, gravity is a law. And those of us who believe in God believe that that's just one of the ways God's arranged things. So if you jump off a tall building, you're not going to fight gravity. You're not going to win. You're not going to say your prayers on the way down and learn to fly. You're going to hit the ground hard. It's a law of the universe. Similarly, there is this law in the universe that just prevents things from moving without energy. Things do not move on their own. There is no such thing as perpetual motion.
What was the question?
Yes. You couldn't ask that 5 minutes ago. You're going to stop me in mid-flow when I'm talking about the first and second law of thermodynamics. You've got to put it in your hand and say, I missed the question. Back of the class, you're held in for break. That's it. No recess for you. Don't clap. The question, my dear Gina. My dear Gina, I have to come back now. My dear Gina, who looks a bit like Sophia Loren. The question was, I said that this business of being stuck in problems seems to be God's fault. And so, could I explain that? Which I was trying to do. So there is this thing in the universe. No physical body, visible or invisible, is able to move without energy being applied to it. That's just a fact. I think that also applies to life. I think if we want something, it's not just going to happen. If we want to fix something, it's not going to get fixed by magic. Without the application of effort and energy, nothing happens. True in the physical universe, true in life. You know it makes sense. Good question. Thank you, both of you. Any other questions? Good, okay, thank you for coming. Next Sunday we're going to talk about personal finances. It's going to be good and useful. And do you want me to pray? I'll pray and then we'll go, okay? In your happiness, may God protect you. In your peace, may He shield you. In your brokenness, may He comfort you. And in all your ways this day, may you know Him walking with you. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.